The first time anyone realized that Galactic Warlord Croth had a sense of humor, or perhaps, a sense of misjudgment, was when he arrived at the small human colony of Prairie Alpha 9 and demanded an audience with its so-called leader. The colony, as it happened, was nothing more than a scattering of squat metallic buildings nestled amidst endless golden fields of grain that swayed in perfect synchrony with the faintest planetary breeze. It was quiet. Too quiet. The humans themselves were even quieter, going about their daily routines with an almost zen-like monotony, tending to their crops, repairing rusting machines, and occasionally waving politely at passing drones. For an intergalactic warlord used to planets trembling under the shadow of his fleet, this level of calm was infuriating. Croth's flagship descended slowly, the air crackling with the hum of hyperquantum engines. Below, the ground vibrated, and windows rattled. The locals, who had never even seen an interstellar cruiser beyond holographic news, peered up curiously. And then the unmistakable roar of Croth's voice, amplified through the city-shattering comm system, boomed across the fields. "Human inhabitants! I, Croth the Invincible, have come to assess your planet's submission. Send forth your leader!" There was a pause. The colony's residents exchanged glances, all the while keeping their hands busy, pruning, repairing, and tending to chickens that somehow seemed immune to cosmic tension. The human who finally appeared, standing with a curious mix of nonchalance and authority, was a man named Tobias Hemsworth. He was an ordinary-looking human with calloused hands, a wide-brimmed straw hat, and overalls dusted in ochre from a morning spent harvesting root vegetables. A watering can hung awkwardly in one hand. He waved at the hovering warlord fleet as if greeting a neighbor who had stopped by unannounced. Hey there!" Tobias called cheerfully, his voice carrying across the fields. "You must be the new guy." "I'm Tobias, I run the place." Croth blinked. Then blinked again. His perception modules, designed to detect alpha threats in the cosmos, misfired somewhere between small mammal colony and civilized planet under rebellion. He expected fear, trembling, a million simulations of humans cowering and surrendering. Instead, he got a man who looked like he should be selling corn at a farmer's market. You are the leader?" Croth demanded, his voice rising to an octave that could have shattered steel if humans had ears calibrated for such frequencies. "You look like a simple agricultural worker." Tobias tipped his hat, squinting at the massive hovering behemoth of metal and glowing weapons above. "Well, yeah. That's basically what I do. We farm stuff. Vegetables, grains, the usual." He gestured lazily at a row of metal silos in the distance. "But I suppose that's why you're here. Looking for someone scary?" Croth's claws tightened on the edge of his command platform. This was no ordinary planetary diplomat, he realized. Somewhere deep in the analysis matrices of his mind, alarms were triggering. Humans weren't supposed to react to intimidation like this. They weren't supposed to casually wave at a warlord who could have obliterated them with a single plasma volley. This human was different. "Your defiance is unacceptable," Croth roared, sending a ripple of low-frequency shockwaves across the farm. The soil trembled, the crops bent unnaturally, and chickens took off in flapping panic. Tobias, however, ducked instinctively, not out of fear but out of habit. He was used to dealing with pests, sudden weather changes, and occasional tractor malfunctions that could topple a person if they weren't careful. Standing upright again, he shook off a bit of dirt and smiled. "I guess that's your way of saying hi, huh?" Croth's sensors began running high-speed calculations, intimidation metrics, expected panic response, threat absorption rates. And yet, every single one of the predicted outcomes failed. Tobias was statistically improbable, behaviorally erratic, and fundamentally unquantifiable. He was the worst kind of anomaly, human. The warlord took a deep breath, or whatever counted as a deep breath in a creature designed for consuming entire planets' atmospheres in a single hour. "I challenge your species to submit to galactic sovereignty. Resistance is futile. You will kneel, or you will face annihilation." Tobias scratched his chin, a habit he had while thinking about whether the tomato seedlings would survive the upcoming solar flare predicted by the colony's modest weather monitor. Neil, huh? That seems messy. But I'm curious, what's in it for me if I don't? Crotha's mandibles snapped. You will be destroyed. Obliterated. Erased from existence. Your world will be a memory of dust and silence. Tobias paused, letting the statement settle for a second before smiling with a gentle sort of amusement. Sounds dramatic. You know, most of the folks around here don't even have interstellar fleets. They mostly have pitchforks. But I suppose we can try to negotiate. Crotha's sensors interpreted that word as prelude to surrender. But Tobias wasn't surrendering. Not even close. Instead, he stepped forward with what could only be described as a farmer's grin, one that suggested confidence bordering on mischief. Tell you what. Why don't we make this interesting? You want us to submit? Fine. I'll challenge you to a contest. Croth tilted his head, a maneuver so slow and calculated it took 3 of his lieutenants to compute the mechanics of balance and intent. A contest? What manner of absurdity is this? Explain yourself, human. Tobias tapped his boots in the soil and gestured around casually. Let's see, How about this? We each try to outdo the other in our area of expertise. You're a warlord, right? Big, scary, destructive. Me? I grow things. Nurture things. Feed people. Keep the universe fed, one potato at a time. He picked up a small, dirt-encrusted potato from the ground and held it like a trophy. If I can show you that even a humble human like me can defend my home, maybe you'll think twice before bringing your fancy death fleet down here. Crotha's bioengineered brain struggled to process the concept. Competing with a human farmer in farming? What kind of madness was this? Yet the notion of victory was irresistible, so he agreed. The warlord's massive hand hovered above his command deck, lowering a series of holographic displays that glimmered with tactical analyses, destructive protocols, and interstellar weapon schematics. Very well, human. You have 1 solar cycle. Show me the might of your species in defending this barren, insignificant world. Tobias blinked. 1 solar cycle? That was plenty of time for him to do exactly what he did best. And yet, even he realized, the challenge wasn't going to be about tractors or seed drills alone. This was Croth. This was the being who could disassemble planets for sport. If Tobias were going to stand a chance, he'd need to think creatively. And dangerously. That evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of violet and copper, Tobias strolled among the fields, inspecting his humble farm equipment. But his mind wasn't on harvests, it was on the audacious, impossible plan that had begun forming in his thoughts. He had grown up on stories of survival, of outsmarting predators far larger and faster than any human. And now, he would apply that same cunning against a creature who had probably never met a real threat that didn't come in the form of missiles or plasma bolts. Tobias's neighbors watched him curiously, shaking their heads at his preposterous optimism. You're planning on fighting Croth with a hoe? One of them whispered to a friend. Tobias overheard and waved cheerfully. Nope. Just observing the fields. Strategy, folks. It's all strategy. Meanwhile, aboard the warlord's flagship, Croth convened his council. These humans, he hissed. They defy logic. 1 farmer, 1 mere agriculturalist, dares to challenge me. Prepare the assault drones. I will watch his attempts and crush them as soon as his feeble plan emerges. As the night deepened, the first signs of unusual activity stirred. Tobias moved silently among his equipment, tinkering with machinery, setting small, inconspicuous traps in the field, and planting more than seeds in the soil. He was planting ideas, mechanisms, and the first threads of a strategy that no galactic invader could predict. By dawn, Prairie Alpha 9 seemed entirely peaceful. The crops swayed lazily. Chickens clucked in their pens. The occasional tractor emitted a puff of smoke, innocuous to the eye. But beneath this quiet, Tobias had transformed the farm into a battleground of wits. Every irrigation channel, every storage silo, every fence post had been repurposed as part of his plan. The humans around him watched in awe, or terror, they weren't sure which. Then, with the first rays of the sun catching the metallic sheen of Crotha's ships, Tobias stepped forward again, holding his prized potato like a scepter. He addressed the warlord, entirely unfazed by the overwhelming display of interstellar might above. "Welcome back, sir. Let's see how this goes, shall we?" Crotha's optics flared. His warships hummed in anticipation. And somewhere deep in his calculated mind, the first real traces of unease began to form. A farmer. A human. And yet, somehow, the scale of the coming challenge was entirely uncertain and terrifying. The stage was set. And the universe, for the first time, would witness that even a small human farm could cast a shadow larger than a warlord's fleet. The morning sun gleamed off the polished metal of Crotha's flagship as Tobias surveyed his fields with an almost serene calm. From orbit, the warlord's sensors scanned every square meter of Prairie Alpha 9, cataloging the crops, the humans, and the odd contraptions that now dotted the landscape. A fleet of drones buzzed like angry hornets, their sensors calibrated to detect any hint of human strategy or weaponry. Crotha's confidence remained unshaken. Surely, in a single solar cycle, this primitive creature would reveal his incompetence. Tobias, however, had long understood the advantage of perception versus reality. From a distance, he looked like nothing more than a man in overalls, tinkering absent-mindedly. But beneath his calm exterior, an intricate plan had been set into motion. Each row of corn, each metal fence post, each scarecrow had been subtly modified. Some were simple camouflage, some were mechanical triggers, and others were designed to exploit the very physics that Crotha's fleet relied upon. The warlord assumed that he was monitoring a defenseless planet. Tobias knew better. The battlefield had been disguised as a farm. He started the day by addressing the neighbors, most of whom had been skeptical but loyal. "All right, folks," he said, brushing dirt from his hands. "It's time to see if all our hard work pays off. Remember, the goal isn't to defeat the fleet head-on. They're bigger, faster, stronger. The goal is to make them think they're already losing." A small contingent of colonists, armed with nothing more than repurposed tools, plows, harpoons, nets, and pneumatic launchers, stood ready. Tobias grinned at the improvised militia. "You're not just farmers today. You're strategists. Engineers. Artists. Let's make them underestimate us." At first, the assault seemed almost laughably one-sided. Crotha's drones descended, scanning, probing, ready to obliterate anything resembling resistance. But as the first drone swept over the northern field, it encountered what appeared to be a simple scarecrow holding a pitchfork. Its sensors, designed for advanced threat detection, interpreted the structure as a mechanical weapon. Instantly, a warning flashed aboard the flagship. "Potential hostile entity detected. Caution." Encouraged by the initial success, Tobias activated the first layer of his trap. Hidden beneath the soil were pneumatic tubes designed to launch rocks in unpredictable arcs. As drones passed, small projectiles erupted from the ground, ricocheting across the metal hulls. Croth watched in disbelief as drones spiraled out of control, some colliding midair with others, their self-repair systems overwhelmed. "You call this resistance?" Croth bellowed, masking his irritation. "This is chaos, not strategy. Suppress it." But Tobias's strategy wasn't chaos. It was careful orchestration. He had studied the drones' flight patterns, their response algorithms, and their visual recognition thresholds. Each move in the field was designed to exploit weaknesses in technology he barely understood but trusted his intuition to reveal. When a drone dove too low, it triggered tripwires connected to high-pressure water cannons repurposed from irrigation systems. The sudden blast sent the drones tumbling like leaves caught in a storm. Meanwhile, Tobias moved silently through the field, planting small, reflective panels that created false optical signals. To the drones, it appeared that human forces were advancing in multiple directions at once, though in reality, Tobias was often alone. The illusion of overwhelming numbers forced Croth to rethink his approach. Every scan indicated activity in sectors devoid of life. Every laser sweep met with nothing but a clever trick of light and motion. By midday, Kroth's patience was fraying. The warlord was not accustomed to failure, especially not against a single human, and certainly not in a scenario where raw power could not guarantee victory. His fleet repositioned, attempting to calibrate for precision strikes. Tobias, however, anticipated this. Cornstalks had been reinforced with a lightweight composite that bent without breaking, creating a natural deflection grid. Missiles and plasma bolts, when they struck, scattered harmlessly into the fields, detonating with minimal impact. Tobias took a brief moment to admire the scene, a field of waving crops, seemingly innocent, yet every stalk a piece of a defensive puzzle. Even the chickens, surprisingly, had a role. Nets and automated flapping wings created unpredictable motion patterns, confusing optical sensors and causing the drones to miscalculate distances. Tobias chuckled to himself as one particularly large drone collided with a water tower, sending a fountain of liquid into the air like a bizarre victory signal. Kroth, meanwhile, convened a council. This human, he manipulates the battlefield like a master tactician. How is this possible? His advisors trembled, unable to provide satisfactory answers. Kroth's mind raced. He had conquered planets, subjugated civilizations, and demolished armies. Yet this human, a mere farmer, was turning fields into fortresses, scarecrows into saboteurs, and potatoes into symbols of defiance. Tobias, sensing that the warlord was becoming desperate, escalated his strategy. He activated his secondary system, a series of modified tractors rigged with pulleys, counterweights, and pneumatic arms. From a distance, they appeared to be simple machines performing mundane farm work. But in reality, they could trip sensors, block targeting systems, and even intercept incoming projectiles with precise timing. The tractors moved autonomously, guided by subtle magnets and preset paths Tobias had charted weeks in advance. Kroth's fleet struggled to recalibrate with every unexpected movement. What is happening? Kroth roared, his multi-lensed eyes flaring. I have read the strategic matrices of every species in this quadrant. None possess such ingenuity at the individual level. How can one human orchestrate this? Tobias, crouched behind a stack of hay bales, simply smiled. He knew the answer, though explaining it to Kroth would have been pointless. Humans had a way of thinking that wasn't bound by standard logic. Imagination, risk-taking, humor, and an understanding of unpredictability gave them an edge over even the most advanced warlord. As the day progressed, Kroth attempted to strike back more aggressively. Plasma cannons, orbital bombardments, energy nets, all deployed with lethal precision. Yet every attack played into Tobias's plan. Channels diverted energy, reinforced silos absorbed impacts, and reflective surfaces sent laser pulses back into the fleet, causing temporary sensor blinding. Each countermeasure seemed to escalate Kroth's frustration. Tobias knew he couldn't keep the warlord occupied with these small tactics forever. He needed a psychological edge, something that would force Kroth to question the entire mission. And then it hit him, a classic, almost absurd human technique, deception through confidence. He climbed to the top of a small mound, holding the potato he had earlier used to greet Kroth like a ceremonial staff. All right, Kroth, he called, voice carrying across the fields and into the fleet's receivers. You think this is impressive? This is just the beginning. If you want me to stop, you'll have to actually try. And I warn you, I don't play fair. Sensors registered the potato as an object of no threat. Kroth's systems hesitated, unsure whether to target it or ignore it. Tobias then casually tossed the potato toward the largest drone. A string attached to the potato triggered a motion sensor buried underground, activating a series of small explosions that launched netting and tethered cables across the drone's path. The drone became entangled and crashed into the soil, flipping like a toy. The colonists erupted into quiet cheers. Tobias smiled but kept moving. He knew Kroth was adapting, recalculating, learning. That meant he had to keep innovating, stay one step ahead. He introduced decoys next, mechanical scarecrows dressed in overalls, each carrying fake tools. From a distance, they looked like human soldiers, moving in synchronized patterns that mimicked combat formations. Croth, relying on visual sensors, interpreted this as a mass mobilization of troops. Every attempt to fire upon these forces resulted in missed shots or collisions among the warlord's drones. By nightfall, the battle had escalated into something resembling a surreal theater. Fields that should have been quiet were now labyrinths of wires, triggers, reflective surfaces, and mechanical devices. Croth's fleet, despite all its power, was effectively trapped in a game of cat and mouse designed by a farmer. For the first time in his existence, Croth experienced doubt, not fear, but doubt. Doubt that the all-powerful galactic sovereignty could overcome a single human mind using wit and resourcefulness. Tobias, exhausted but invigorated, took a moment to look over the fields. Small fires from controlled detonations cast flickering shadows, giving the appearance of human activity far greater than reality. Tractors moved autonomously, scarecrows stood at rigid attention, and every crop stalk seemed to have a purpose. It was beautiful in its absurdity, terrifying in its ingenuity, and utterly human. Inside the flagship, Croth paced. "Prepare the ultimate strike," he commanded, desperation creeping into his voice. "Destroy everything. Show no mercy." But Tobias anticipated this too. Hidden channels diverted energy, tractors moved in unpredictable patterns, and reflective panels created illusions of troop concentrations where none existed. As plasma bolts streaked toward the field, they were deflected harmlessly or absorbed in soft soil. Croth's flagship registered damage, not to the humans, but to his own tactical confidence. Finally, Tobias allowed himself a small laugh, a sound so human it carried both amusement and challenge. "I told you," he whispered to the stars. "You don't have to be stronger to win. Just cleverer." The warlord was trapped in a growing nightmare, a single human, wielding nothing but wit, ingenuity, and the tools of a farmer, had transformed a pastoral landscape into an impenetrable fortress of unpredictability. Every attack he launched was countered by seemingly mundane devices. Every strategy was undermined by improvisation. For the first time, Croth faced a problem that brute force alone could not solve. And Tobias knew that tomorrow, the challenge would escalate even further. The warlord had underestimated the resourcefulness of a human farmer. He had assumed predictability, linear logic, and fear. He had assumed weakness. He had assumed wrongly. By the end of the solar cycle, Tobias had created not just a defensive system but a psychological labyrinth. Croth, observing from orbit, could not distinguish reality from illusion. Every field appeared populated. Every scarecrow a sentinel. Every tractor a soldier. Every potato a threat. The farmer's unconventional tactics had turned Prairie Alpha 9 into a fortress of human creativity, unpredictable, relentless, and utterly confounding. Croth had come seeking submission. He found instead a lesson in humility. Never underestimate a species that could turn a simple farm into an instrument of war. Dawn broke over Prairie Alpha 9 with a deceptive calm, the kind that whispered of storms yet to come. Tobias Hemsworth stood at the edge of his fields, staring up at the metallic expanse of Croth's flagship. The warlord's fleet now orbited the planet like a predatory constellation, its presence oppressive, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Yesterday had been chaos carefully orchestrated. Today, Tobias knew, the confrontation would escalate to something far more dangerous. Croth would not tolerate continued humiliation for long. Tobias' mind raced as he surveyed his battlefield. The fields looked ordinary to anyone else, yet every inch had been meticulously designed for defense. Irrigation channels could redirect energy beams. Tractors, now fitted with reinforced shields and automated guidance, moved silently along hidden rails, ready to intercept drones or missiles. Scarecrows held more than just pitchforks. They were arrays of mirrors, sensors, and mechanical triggers. Even the potatoes planted strategically across the northern fields had been fitted with lightweight explosive charges capable of disrupting drone sensors. Tobias chuckled quietly. The absurdity of it all was almost poetic. One man against a warlord fleet, yet here he was, confident. Above, Croth convened his commanders, his voice resonating across the bridge. "Enough games?" he roared. "This human has turned a field of crops into a mockery of my sovereignty. Today, he will face the full might of the Galactic Fleet. Erase him. Leave nothing behind." The fleet surged downward, a coordinated wave of plasma, missiles, and drones. Tobias, standing in the middle of his fields, didn't flinch. Instead, he raised his straw hat, squinting into the sunlight as the first wave approached. "All right, folks," he muttered to the colonists gathered behind reinforced silos and trenches. "Time to show them what we're made of. Stick to the plan. Watch the patterns. And remember, chaos is our friend." The first salvo struck the northern field. Tobias ducked instinctively behind a reinforced storage silo as explosions erupted across the ground. Dust and debris filled the air, but the damage was minimal. The channels redirected energy beams harmlessly into deep soil pits. The tractors moved into intercept patterns, their pneumatic arms flipping incoming projectiles skyward like a skilled juggler. One by one, drones collided midair or became entangled in nets launched from hidden launchers. Croth's sensors, designed for precision targeting, struggled to adapt. Tobias' eyes gleamed as he observed the confusion. Each failed strike reinforced a principle he had learned long ago: predictability was a weakness, unpredictability a weapon. The colonists followed his lead, launching improvised devices, harpoons, nets, and high-pressure water cannons, each designed to exploit gaps in the drone's algorithms. Even the chickens played a role, scattering in flocks to confuse motion sensors and trigger pressure-sensitive tripwires. Croth, observing the chaos, felt his confidence slipping. Every calculated attack was countered with improvisation. Every drone dispatched returned as debris, wreckage, or a warning of how clever these humans could be. "Focus all fire," he commanded, his multi-lensed eyes glowing with frustration. "Overwhelm them with sheer power." Tobias, anticipating this, activated the next layer of his strategy: controlled decoys combined with high-intensity reflections. Mirrors, polished and mounted on movable frames, created illusions of human forces advancing in directions they weren't actually present. The flagship's sensors detected troop concentrations where there were none, prompting missile volleys to collide harmlessly midair. The human colonists, meanwhile, remained hidden, conserving energy and maintaining composure. As the battle escalated, Tobias moved with the grace of someone who had spent decades navigating unpredictable terrain. He ducked, rolled, and sprinted between cover points, deploying devices and setting triggers. Each movement seemed almost casual, yet each had a purpose. A small explosion here, a reflective panel there, a diversionary tractor over yonder, all worked in harmony to create a symphony of resistance that Croth could not comprehend. The warlord, realizing that conventional tactics were failing, decided to intervene personally. He descended from the flagship in a massive exoframe, each step shaking the ground, sending vibrations through the fields. His claws, capable of tearing through metal, gleamed in the sunlight. Tobias paused for a moment, his heart rate rising slightly, not with fear, but with the awareness that this was the ultimate test. Croth roared, lifting a massive energy hammer that crackled with concentrated power. "You think your gadgets and tricks can save you, human? Face me directly!" Tobias smiled faintly. "Directly, huh? Well, I suppose that's fair." He adjusted his grip on the wooden farming staff he carried, not just a tool for the soil, but part of his improvisational arsenal. Every notch carved into the wood, every subtle weight adjustment, had been calculated for balance, leverage, and surprise. The warlord lunged. Tobias ducked instinctively, rolling under a swinging claw that struck the ground with a shockwave, uprooting a small patch of crops. He countered by activating a hidden pulley system connected to a nearby silo, sending a cascade of grain raining down onto Croth's sensors. The warlord paused, blinded and distracted, giving Tobias the opportunity to maneuver into position. With precise timing, Tobias triggered a trap hidden beneath the soil, a network of high-tension cables connected to weighted tractors. The moment Croth lifted his hammer for a second strike, the tractors surged forward along hidden tracks, tripping over the cables and colliding with the warlord's exoframe. The impact staggered Kroth, causing him to lose balance momentarily. Tobias didn't hesitate. He darted between the warlord's legs, activating a reflective panel that redirected the sun's rays into Kroth's multi-lensed eyes. The warlord roared in frustration, temporarily blinded. Tobias used the moment to leap onto a small rise, planting explosive charges beneath the feet of advancing drones. The detonations sent the machines flying into the fields, each crash creating a miniature shockwave that further disoriented Kroth. Every move Tobias made seemed absurdly simple to the untrained eye, yet each was part of an intricate web of tactics designed to exploit Kroth's expectations. The warlord had underestimated human unpredictability, their ability to improvise, and their capacity for creative problem-solving. He had assumed that raw power alone would be enough to secure victory. He was wrong. As the sun climbed higher, the battle reached its climax. Kroth, now visibly enraged, prepared to unleash his ultimate weapon, a concentrated energy beam capable of vaporizing the entire northern field. Tobias, realizing there was no conventional defense left, relied on ingenuity over brute force. He triggered the final phase of his plan, a combination of mirrors, water reflections, and high-pressure air bursts that dispersed the beam's energy into multiple directions, effectively neutralizing it. The flagship trembled as systems overloaded, unable to compensate for the chaotic feedback. Kroth's sensors failed repeatedly, creating false readings and phantom targets. Tobias moved calmly through the chaos, orchestrating each action with the precision of a seasoned conductor leading a symphony of controlled destruction. Finally, with a decisive maneuver, Tobias activated a network of cables connected to weighted tractors and decoy scarecrows. They surged forward, creating a physical barrier that forced Kroth to stumble and crash into a reinforced silo. The impact sent debris flying, momentarily trapping the warlord in a maze of farm equipment. Tobias seized the opportunity to approach, staff in hand, and tap lightly on Kroth's armor. "You know," Tobias said, voice calm but filled with quiet authority, "this doesn't have to end badly. You came here expecting submission. You got resistance, creativity, and a few potatoes. That's all humans really need." Kroth, struggling to free himself, growled in disbelief. His systems were compromised, his fleet confused, and his confidence shattered. Every calculation he had made about humans, about power, about logic, had been upended by one man's ingenuity. Tobias' calm demeanor, his humor in the face of annihilation, and his ability to turn the environment into an ally had defeated him. For a moment, silence fell over the battlefield. The colonists watched from cover, hardly daring to breathe. Tobias stood upright, staff in hand, eyes fixed on the massive warlord who now realized that victory was impossible through force alone. Kroth's multi-lensed eyes flickered erratically, processing a truth that his advanced algorithms had failed to predict: humans were not to be underestimated. Finally, the warlord withdrew, retreating to his flagship. He hovered above the field, assessing the damage, his pride wounded more than his body. Tobias watched him go, knowing that today had not just been a battle of strength, but a lesson in creativity, courage, and the audacity of the human spirit. The colonists erupted into cautious celebration, emerging from their shelters to survey the intact fields and machinery. Tobias smiled, brushing dust from his overalls. "Well," he said, almost conversationally, "that's one way to start a Monday." As Kroth's fleet disappeared into orbit, the warlord's advisors whispered among themselves, unable to comprehend the humans' victory. Tobias, meanwhile, returned to his fields, inspecting crops and repairing minor damage with the calm diligence of a man who understood that life, and survival, was about adaptability. He glanced at the horizon, where the twin suns glimmered, and allowed himself a small laugh. "Not bad for a day's work," he muttered, turning back to the fields. The warlord had come seeking dominance. He had found instead the ingenuity, resourcefulness, and sheer unpredictability of a human mind that refused to yield. Tobias Hemsworth, the farmer who had faced the Galactic Warlord and lived to laugh about it, resumed his work, planting seeds not just in soil, but in the minds of anyone who might hear the tale, Never underestimate the quiet ones, the ordinary ones, the humans. They were far more dangerous than anyone imagined. And as the wind rustled through the golden fields, Tobias realized that the true battle had been more than survival. It had been a statement, a declaration that humans were clever, resourceful, and utterly unpredictable. The warlord had challenged humanity. And a farmer had shown the galaxy why underestimating humans was the gravest mistake anyone could make. The day after Kroth's retreat began like any other on Prairie Alpha 9, yet there was an unspoken tension in the air. Tobias Hemsworth, the unassuming farmer who had single-handedly outwitted a galactic warlord, stood surveying his fields with a quiet satisfaction. The crops, slightly bruised from the previous day's chaos, swayed gently in the breeze as if celebrating survival. The colonists moved about, repairing minor damage to equipment, and exchanging nervous smiles that slowly grew into laughter. The human capacity for resilience was on full display. But Tobias knew the danger was far from over. Kroth was not a creature who forgot humiliation easily. Retreat for a warlord was merely a pause, a moment to strategize, regroup, and strike with even greater force. Tobias understood that the real victory wasn't simply surviving the first confrontation, it was ensuring that the warlord would never again underestimate humans, and that any future attempts would be met with an unanticipated and uniquely human response. The morning sun reflected off the metallic shards of destroyed drones scattered across the fields, and Tobias bent down to examine a damaged tractor that had been pressed into defensive service. With a twist of his wrench, he began reinforcing it, not just for utility but for demonstration. The humans around him followed suit, transforming what was left of their humble farm into a hybrid fortress farm, a living testament to ingenuity and improvisation. Kroth's fleet remained in orbit, observing from a safe distance. The warlord had called off immediate assault, but he monitored the planet incessantly, unable to comprehend the full scope of what he had faced. Tobias, of course, had anticipated this. "Let's give them a little incentive," he said under his breath, eyes glinting with mischief. He and a team of colonists began preparing the final phase of their defense, a display that would cement the warlord's perception of human unpredictability. The plan was simple in concept but devilishly effective. Tobias used reflective panels, repurposed irrigation pipes, and automated scarecrow systems to create a landscape that seemed populated by an army of human defenders. But the true genius lay in the psychological element. Every move, every signal, every mechanical device was designed to convey capability far beyond the colony's actual size. When the warlord scouts transmitted visual data back to Kroth's command systems, they interpreted vast troop concentrations where there were only a handful of humans. Next, Tobias introduced elements that were even more absurd and unexpected. He rigged decoy systems to emit bursts of sound mimicking large-scale weaponry, combined with controlled detonations of harmless materials to simulate battlefield explosions. A series of tractors were connected to subtle pulley systems, allowing them to move as if autonomously, giving the illusion of mobile squads. Chickens, strategically released, provided random motion and chaos, triggering sensors that detected movement as aggressive maneuvers. By midday, Kroth's fleet was beginning to falter under confusion. The warlord had expected humans to be predictable, to surrender, to fail. Instead, he observed a world where every corner seemed to conceal resistance. Every field appeared bristling with activity. Every tractor, scarecrow, and chicken seemed a potential threat. His sensors, optimized for detecting real weaponry, were overwhelmed by the unpredictability of a species that had turned farming into an art of deception. Tobias took a step back, surveying the results. The colonists worked in seamless coordination, executing each phase of the plan with precision, all while maintaining the casual demeanor of ordinary people tending their fields. Tobias allowed himself a quiet laugh. "Sometimes," he said, addressing no one in particular, "the simplest tools are the most effective, especially when you know how to use them creatively." Kroth, unable to accept the reality, deployed additional reconnaissance drones, each equipped with advanced imaging systems designed to penetrate deception and expose hidden threats. Tobias anticipated this as well. Small mirrors and reflective surfaces redirected light and sensor readings, creating phantom structures, phantom troops, and even phantom weapon emplacements. Drones swooped into what appeared to be heavily defended positions, only to crash harmlessly into empty soil. The warlord, now personally involved, attempted to intimidate Tobias with sheer presence. He descended from his flagship in the massive exoframe, intent on eliminating the human directly. Tobias, ever calm, greeted him with a simple wave of his straw hat. "Hello again," he said, voice steady and amused. "Careful where you step. The ground's a bit lively today." Croth swung a massive claw, but Tobias' anticipation of timing and movement allowed him to sidestep and trigger a series of countermeasures that ensnared the warlord in nets connected to hidden weights and pulleys. The exoframe struggled, momentarily immobilized, as a cascade of harmless but disruptive devices, a mix of spinning reflective panels, pulsing air bursts, and strategically placed water sprays, kept the warlord disoriented. It was then that Tobias implemented the final, most audacious part of his plan. Using an old irrigation system repurposed as a pneumatic launch network, he sent small, dense projectiles careening toward the warlord's sensors. Each impact was carefully calculated to jam optical and auditory systems without causing harm to the environment. Croth, struggling against these unexpected obstacles, realized for the first time that victory was not merely difficult, it was impossible without adapting to human ingenuity, which, by nature, could not be fully predicted or countered. Tobias stepped forward, holding in his hands the simplest of tools, a wooden farming staff. "You came here thinking strength alone could secure victory," he said calmly. "You assumed fear would bend us. But humans, well, we find ways. We adapt. We improvise. And sometimes the quietest voice in the field carries the loudest message." Croth's massive frame shuddered as systems continued to malfunction. The warlord had underestimated a human farmer's ability to turn a humble environment into a complex network of strategic advantage. For the first time, Croth experienced not defeat through force, but defeat through unpredictability and intellect. With a final effort, Tobias activated a combination of decoys, reflective surfaces, and automated tractors, creating the impression of an overwhelming assault force converging on the warlord. Croth, interpreting this as a real threat beyond his ability to counter, issued a retreat. His fleet disengaged, pulling back into orbit, leaving Prairie Alpha 9 intact. The humans had not only survived, they had won, without a single casualty. The colonists erupted into celebration, cheering and clapping as Tobias returned to their midst. "You did it," one of them said breathlessly. "You actually did it. You beat a galactic warlord with farming?" Tobias smiled, dusting off his overalls. "Not just farming," he said. "Ingenuity, observation, patience, and a little bit of absurdity. That's the real weapon." As the day drew to a close, Tobias moved among his fields, checking crops, repairing damage, and quietly reflecting on the events. The fields looked peaceful, ordinary even, but beneath that veneer lay a testament to human resilience, creativity, and humor. The lesson was clear: power alone was not enough to secure victory. Intelligence, adaptability, and courage could turn the tables, even against overwhelming odds. Croth's fleet remained visible in orbit, a reminder that threats still existed, but the psychological victory was complete. The humans of Prairie Alpha 9 had demonstrated that even the simplest, most ordinary lives could harbor extraordinary potential. Tobias, for his part, returned to the routine of farm life with a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had changed not only the warlord's perception but the entire galaxy's understanding of humanity. That evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, Tobias gathered the colonists together. They sat around a communal fire, sharing stories, repairing tools, and laughing at the absurdity of the past day. Tobias held up the same wooden staff that had guided their victory. "Remember this," he said, voice carrying across the group. "It's not always the biggest weapon that wins. Sometimes it's the mind. Sometimes it's creativity. And sometimes, it's just a potato. Laughter erupted, mingling with the crackle of the fire. The humans of Prairie Alpha 9 had faced the impossible and emerged victorious, not through sheer force, but through courage, ingenuity, and humor. They had turned a battlefield into a stage, an ordinary farm into a fortress, and a farmer into a hero. From orbit, Croth watched, unable to comprehend fully how a single human had orchestrated such a defense. The lesson was painful, yet undeniable. Humanity could not be underestimated. One farmer had redefined the rules of engagement for an entire galaxy. Tobias, meanwhile, leaned back in his chair, watching the stars appear. He allowed himself a quiet smile, savoring the victory that was equal parts strategic brilliance and absurdly human creativity. And so, life on Prairie Alpha 9 returned to its quiet rhythm. The fields were tended, the crops flourished, and the colonists continued their daily routines, each carrying a sense of pride that transcended words. Tobias, the farmer who had challenged a galactic warlord, had not only defended his home but had proven that ordinary humans, armed with ingenuity and courage, could change the course of events on a cosmic scale. As night fell, he looked at the stars one last time and whispered, almost playfully, "Anytime you want to try again, Croth, the potatoes are ready." The fields swayed under the twin moons, peaceful and golden, yet charged with the quiet knowledge that humanity had once again demonstrated its indomitable spirit. Ordinary lives had produced extraordinary results. One man had faced the impossible and won. One farm had become a symbol of defiance, intelligence, and resilience. And the galaxy, for the first time, truly understood the meaning of underestimating a human.